The Royal Council did not throw the dying creature at Commander Elias Ven's feet because they were cruel. Cruelty would have been too honest. They did it because every camera in the imperial court was watching, every noble house was laughing, and every enslaved sky beast chained above the capital needed to see what happened when a human dared demand payment from kings. The thing they gave him was barely alive. Its body was longer than a shuttle, folded in on itself beneath translucent skin that shimmered like cracked glass. Tubes hung from its throat. Its sealed eyes twitched under scarred lids. Its chest rose only when the rusted breathing machine beside it forced air into lungs that should have belonged to something born for vacuum, not a palace floor. The council called it a cursed void leviathan, a failed hatchling, a sacred mistake too ugly for execution and too worthless for ceremony. Elias looked at the creature, then at the laughing rulers above him, and did not bow. That was the first silence. The second came when he placed 2 fingers against the beast's ruined chest and felt the impossible rhythm beneath the damage. Not a dying heartbeat, not panic, not weakness. It beat in measured pulses, deep and steady, like an engine waiting for ignition. The High Regent smiled from his golden throne. "There is your payment, human. Take your miracle of garbage and leave before it stains the marble." Elias had repaired warships split in half above dead moons. He had rebuilt soldiers from metal and memory when alien medics had already signed their death records. He knew the sound of something ending. This was not that sound. He stood slowly, grease still under his fingernails, blood from the creature's cracked breathing tube staining his sleeve. "You didn't give me a corpse," he said, his voice carrying through the court with terrifying calm. "You gave me something you were afraid to let wake up." No one laughed after that. The regent's smile vanished for less than a second, but Elias saw it. So did the creature. Its sealed eyes moved beneath the scars, turning toward the sound of his voice as if, through pain, poison, and years of engineered silence, it had just recognized the first being in the empire who was not looking at it like property. Then the breathing machine stopped, and in the sudden quiet, the dead Leviathan began breathing on its own. They tried to pretend the moment had not happened. The breathing machine sputtered once more and went silent, its rusted valves locking in place as if the device itself understood it was no longer needed. For a fraction of a second, the entire imperial court held its breath with it. Then the Leviathan's chest rose again, slower this time, deeper, drawing air not through machinery but through its own broken lungs. A sound followed, low, uneven, almost too quiet to notice, but Elias felt it through his fingertips before he heard it. It was not a cry. It was not pain. It was awareness. The High Regent recovered first, his voice snapping back into place like a blade returning to its sheath. "Remove that thing," he ordered as though nothing had changed. "It will not die here and stain the ceremony." But the guards did not move immediately. They hesitated, just long enough for Elias to see it. The flicker of uncertainty spreading through trained soldiers who had been told their entire lives that void leviathans did not survive damage like this. That creatures like this did not breathe without machines. That anything labeled cursed was meant to stay broken. Elias withdrew his hand slowly, not because he was afraid, but because he understood something else now. The rhythm beneath the creature's chest was not stabilizing. It was synchronizing with him. He straightened, wiping his blood-streaked fingers across his coat without looking away from the Leviathan. "I'll take my payment," he said, voice level, as if the room had not just shifted around them. "And I'll take it now." The regent's gaze hardened. "Take it, then, and take your arrogance with it. When it dies in your care, human, you will learn the difference between confidence and ignorance." Elias did not answer. He signaled the transport crew already waiting at the edge of the chamber, contractors who had worked with him long enough to move without asking questions. Within minutes, the massive form of the Leviathan was lifted onto a reinforced grav sled, its damaged body trembling with each shift in weight. No one spoke as it was removed from the court. No one laughed this time. But as the doors sealed behind them, Elias caught one final detail that settled deeper than anything else. The regent was not watching the creature. He was watching Elias. The journey to the orbital repair station took less than an hour, but it stretched longer in Elias's mind, each second filled with calculations he had not planned to make. The station itself floated far beyond the capital's defensive ring, a skeletal structure of old war-era scaffolding and newer civilian modifications, half forgotten by the Empire but fully operational for those who knew how to use it. It was not a place for miracles. It was a place for salvage. The Leviathan did not move during the transit, but it did not fade either. Its breathing remained slow, uneven, but consistent, and every few minutes, that strange internal rhythm pulsed again, faint but undeniable. Elias monitored it from across the cargo bay, refusing to touch it again until he understood what he was dealing with, because something was wrong. Not with the creature, with the damage. By the time they secured it in the station's primary repair chamber, Elias had already pulled up the first scans. The results came in layers, each one more unsettling than the last. The external injuries were catastrophic but survivable with intervention. The lungs had been partially collapsed but not destroyed. The ocular membranes were scarred but intact beneath the damage. Even the skeletal fractures, severe as they were, showed signs of controlled breakage rather than random trauma. Someone had not tried to kill this creature. They had tried to disable it. Elias leaned over the projection, zooming into the deeper layers, and felt his jaw tighten as the final analysis resolved. Embedded along the Leviathan spine were microfilament disruptors, illegal, highly specialized devices designed to interfere with neural signaling. They were not military standard. They were precision tools, calibrated to suppress specific biological functions without triggering full systemic failure. Flight, perception, autonomous respiration. He stared at the data for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "You weren't born broken," he murmured, more to himself than to the creature. "You were built to look that way." Behind him, one of his crew shifted uneasily. "Commander, if that's true, then whoever did this." "I know," Elias cut in quietly. "It was not an accident. It was not neglect. It was design." He turned back to the Leviathan, studying its still form as new questions layered over the old ones. Why cripple something like this instead of destroying it? Why present it publicly as worthless? Why risk giving it to someone who might notice the difference? Unless they had not expected him to notice. Unless, to them, it did not matter. The creature's chest rose again, deeper now, stronger. The rhythm beneath its body pulsed once more, and this time Elias felt it even without contact, a faint vibration through the station floor that should not have been possible at this stage of recovery. He stepped closer before he could stop himself. "Easy," he said, his voice softer now, instinctively adjusting without knowing why. "You're not dying. Not here." The Leviathan's head shifted. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was movement. Real movement. The first voluntary motion since it had been dragged into the court. Its sealed eyes turned slightly toward him, as though tracking a presence it could not yet see. And then something else happened. A signal flickered across the station's sensor grid. Elias turned sharply, pulling up the external feed as alerts began to cascade across the interface. At first it looked like noise, deep field interference, gravitational distortion, the kind of background anomaly that came and went without explanation. But as he isolated the pattern, the noise resolved into something structured, something deliberate, a pulse. It matched the rhythm. Exactly. His crew fell silent as the realization spread through the room, but Elias did not move. He watched the data stabilize, watched the signal repeat, watched it lock onto the same impossible frequency as the creature behind him. They were connected, not just internally, externally, tracked. "Shut down all external broadcasts," Elias ordered immediately, his voice snapping back into command. "Full sensor blackout. I don't want anything leaving the station unless I approve it." "Commander," one of the technicians said, hesitation creeping in. "If someone's already tracking that signal." "They are," Elias replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to, because now he understood the final piece they had not intended him to see. The Empire had not discarded the Leviathan. They had marked it, and the moment it began to wake up, they had started watching. The first ship arrived without broadcasting. It slid out of the black beyond the station's outer ring, a matte silhouette against starlight that refused to reflect, refused to announce itself, as if even space had agreed not to acknowledge its presence. Elias saw it only because he was already watching for something that should not exist. By the time the station's passive sensors confirmed mass and trajectory, it was already too close. "They found us," one of the crew whispered. Elias did not answer. He was already moving. "Seal all external ports. Kill the running lights. I want the station invisible unless they're standing on the hull," he ordered, hands moving across the console with controlled precision. "Route everything non-essential into the Leviathan chamber. If they breach, that's where we make our stand." "Against what?" someone asked, fear cracking through professionalism. "That's not a patrol ship, Commander. That's a retrieval unit," Elias finished quietly. He had seen designs like it before in classified briefings and buried war archives, vessels built not for negotiation, not for combat in any conventional sense, but for containment, for acquisition, for making sure things that were not supposed to exist in the open did not remain there for long. Behind him, the Leviathan shifted again. The movement was no longer accidental. Its body trembled with growing strength, each breath pulling deeper, each pulse of that internal rhythm echoing stronger through the deck. The microfilament disruptors along its spine flickered on the scan, struggling to maintain suppression against something that was pushing back for the first time. Elias stepped closer, ignoring the alarms building around him. "They're coming for you," he said, not knowing if it understood the words, only trusting the instinct that told him it understood something deeper. "And whatever they think you are, they're wrong." The Leviathan's head lifted a fraction. Its sealed eyes did not open, but the scars along its lids flexed as though something beneath them was trying to break through. The rhythm surged, stronger now, synchronized not just with Elias's presence, but with the approaching threat outside. It was reacting, not to him, to them. A sharp tone cut through the chamber as the first breach attempt registered on the outer hull. Magnetic clamps locked into place, followed by the grinding vibration of forced entry. The retrieval unit did not waste time with diplomacy. "They're cutting through," the technician at the console reported, voice tight. "Multiple points. Fast." Elias exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Then we don't wait." He moved to the primary surgical interface and pulled up the control schema for the disruptors embedded in the Leviathan spine. The system responded instantly, projecting a complex web of suppression signals designed to keep the creature docile, controllable, weak, safe. He studied it for less than a second. Then he began shutting it down. "Commander," someone started. "They crippled it on purpose," Elias said, his voice cutting through the room with absolute clarity. "Every function that makes it dangerous, every system that lets it survive on its own, they didn't destroy them. They buried them." Another impact shuddered through the station as the hull gave way in one section, pressure alarms screaming in response. "And now they're here to make sure it stays buried." One by one, the disruptors flickered offline. The effect was immediate. The Leviathan's body convulsed, not in pain but in release, as systems long suppressed surged back to life. Its chest expanded with a force that bent the restraints holding it in place. The air in the chamber shifted, charged with something Elias could not measure but felt in his bones. A presence vast and rising. The scars along its eyes split. Light bled through. Not reflected light. Not ambient illumination. Something internal, something deep, like stars burning behind glass. The creature inhaled again, and this time the sound was not weak or uneven. It was powerful, awake. The first boarding team breached the chamber doors seconds later. They moved with precision, armored figures carrying containment weapons calibrated for biological suppression, their visors locking onto the Leviathan the moment they entered. One of them raised a device, its core glowing with the same frequency Elias had seen in the disruptors. "Stand down," the lead operative commanded, voice amplified and cold. "The asset is under Imperial reclamation. Interference will be met with lethal response." Elias did not step back. He placed himself between them and the Leviathan, one hand still resting against its rising form. "You don't get to call it an asset," he said. The operative did not hesitate. The weapon discharged. The pulse struck Elias full in the chest. For a fraction of a second, everything stopped. Then the Leviathan moved. It did not lash out blindly. It did not panic. It reacted with terrifying precision, its massive body shifting faster than something its size had any right to move. One limb snapped forward, intercepting the next shot mid-discharge, the energy dispersing harmlessly across newly awakened tissue that should not have been able to absorb it. The chamber shook as the creature rose. Not fully, not yet, but enough. The boarding team hesitated. For the first time since they had entered, their formation broke, just slightly, just enough for Elias to see the change ripple through them. They had expected a restrained organism, a broken thing, a controlled retrieval. They had not expected resistance, and they had not expected intelligence. The Leviathan's gaze, fully open now, blazing with that impossible inner light, fixed on the lead operative. Not with animal confusion, not with instinctive aggression, with recognition. A low-frequency sound filled the chamber, deeper than anything the human ear should comfortably process. It vibrated through the structure, through the bones, through the air itself. Elias felt it more than heard it. A signal, a call, something vast unfolding beyond the limits of the station. The sensor spiked. "Commander," the technician whispered, staring at the external feed. "You need to see this." Elias turned. Space was no longer empty. Out beyond the debris field, beyond the silent orbit of the dead moon, shapes were emerging from the dark. Massive, distant, impossible to fully resolve, but unmistakably alive. One after another, signatures appeared across the sensor grid, each one matching the same frequency now pulsing from the Leviathan behind him. The signal had not been a tracker. It had been a beacon. And the moment Elias removed the suppressors, it had answered. The station could not contain what had just awakened. Every sensor was screaming now, not with error but with overload, as if the universe itself had become too large to measure all at once. The Leviathan's call did not fade after it began. It deepened, layered with harmonics that rippled through space like gravity, given a voice. Outside, the shapes in the dark were no longer distant anomalies. They were approaching, fast. "Commander, those signatures, there are too many," the technician said, panic threading through his voice despite every effort to stay composed. "They're converging on us from every vector. That's not a fleet. That's—" "I know what it is," Elias said quietly. It was not an invasion. It was an answer. Behind him, the boarding team had not fired again. Their weapons remained raised, but the certainty that had carried them into the chamber was gone, replaced by something far more fragile. Doubt. They had trained for containment, for predictable resistance, for controlled outcomes. Nothing about this was controlled anymore. The lead operative recovered enough to speak, though the edge in his voice had dulled. "You have triggered an extinction-level response," he said. "Stand down now, and we may still contain this." Elias turned back to him, one hand still resting against the Leviathan's rising form. He could feel its strength now, not as something overwhelming, but as something deliberate, focused, held back. "No," Elias said. "You've been containing it for a long time." The operative's grip tightened on his weapon. "You don't understand what that thing is." Elias almost smiled. "I think I do," he replied. "And I think you understood it long before I did." Another pulse rolled through the chamber, stronger than the last. The station groaned under the strain, structural supports flexing as if responding to pressure that was not entirely physical. The Leviathan's body continued to rise, restraints snapping one by one, not violently, but inevitably, like chains that had already lost the argument. Its gaze shifted, not toward the soldiers, not toward the station, but outward, beyond the hull, toward the gathering shapes in the void. Elias followed that gaze. They were close enough now to see clearly. Leviathans. Dozens at first, then hundreds, then more than the mind could easily hold at once. Some bore scars like the one beside him, others moved with the fluid grace of unbroken power, but all of them carried the same unmistakable presence. Ancient, enormous, alive in a way that made entire fleets seem temporary by comparison. They were not attacking. They were waiting. "Why aren't they engaging?" one of the crew whispered. Elias understood before the question finished. "Because they're not here for us," he said. The realization settled into the room like gravity. All eyes turned back to the Leviathan. It was no longer struggling. It was choosing. The boarding team saw it too. The lead operative lowered his weapon slightly, uncertainty overtaking protocol. "If that signal propagates further," he said, more to himself now than to Elias, "every controlled organism in the Empire will respond. The entire system will destabilize." "Then maybe it was never stable to begin with," Elias replied. The operative looked at him sharply. "You're risking total collapse." Elias shook his head once. "No. You already built that risk the moment you decided control was more important than truth." For a moment no one moved. Then the operative made a decision of his own. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his weapon the rest of the way. Behind him, the others followed, not out of agreement, but because something fundamental had shifted beyond their authority to correct. Elias turned back to the Leviathan. "You don't need me to tell you what to do," he said softly. "You never did." The creature's massive head lowered, just slightly, until it was level with him. Up close, its eyes were not just light. They were depth, layered with something that felt like memory, like recognition stretching far beyond the moment. It regarded him not as a master, not as a rescuer, but as something else entirely. An equal participant, a witness. The next pulse was different. It did not surge outward in raw force. It unfolded, complex and deliberate, carrying information instead of instinct, intention instead of command. Elias felt it pass through him like a tide, and though he could not translate it, he understood its direction. Not domination, invitation. Outside, the waiting leviathans moved, not as a swarm, not as a weapon, as a response. They spread across the orbital space surrounding the station, forming a vast, shifting lattice of living mass that dwarfed the Imperial presence. The retrieval ship, once so imposing, now looked small, almost irrelevant in comparison. And then, across the wider system, something else began to change. Signals. Hundreds of them, then thousands. From the capital, from the military outposts, from the breeding facilities hidden behind layers of classification and myth. Creatures long suppressed, long controlled, long defined as tools instead of beings, were responding to the same call. Chains broke. Not physically, not all at once, but fundamentally. Control systems failed. Neural suppressors burned out. Command hierarchies dissolved under the weight of something they had never accounted for. Choice. The Empire did not fall in a single moment. It unraveled. The lead operative stared at the external feed, his earlier certainty gone completely now. "This will spread," he said quietly. "There's no way to stop it." Elias did not look away from the Leviathan. "I know." "Then what happens next?" That question lingered longer than the others. Elias considered it not as a strategist, not as a soldier, but as what he had always been at his core. A builder. "A different system," he said finally. "One that doesn't need things like this to stay in power." The Leviathan's gaze softened, if such a thing could be said of something so vast. It drew back slightly, its full form rising now, no longer constrained by the chamber, by the station, by anything that had once defined its limits. The hull above them groaned, then split, not violently, but cleanly, as if making way. Starlight poured in. For the first time since it had been dragged into the court, the Leviathan saw open space without obstruction. It did not hesitate. With a single, powerful motion, it ascended, breaking free of the station and moving into the waiting field of its kind. The others parted for it, not in fear, not in submission, but in recognition. Elias stepped forward to the edge of the broken chamber, watching as the creature he had been given as a joke took its place among giants. It did not lead them. It did not command them, but as it moved, the others moved with it. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Behind him, the station was quiet. No alarms, no gunfire, just the low hum of systems adjusting to a reality they had not been designed to handle. One of his crew approached slowly. "Commander, what do we do now?" Elias kept his eyes on the sky. There was work ahead, more than there had ever been. Systems to rebuild, creatures to heal, entire structures of power to rethink from the ground up. He exhaled, steady and certain. "We start fixing things," he said. And above them, in the open dark, the sky no longer belonged to anyone who claimed it. It belonged to those who were strong enough to break it, and wise enough not to chain it again.